Hello, everyone. My name is Shannon Combs Bennett, and I'm happy to be here talking to you about DNA basics made easy. This is going to be a real simple, quick DNA genetic genealogy brush up. So even if you have never heard of anything before, you're in the right place. If you're an old pro, maybe you'll learn something new. So on that note, let's go ahead and get started today. So, like I said, in this presentation, we're going to start with a simple explanation of what DNA is, why you can use it with genealogy, tests that are available, and who should and who can take these DNA tests that are available direct to consumer on the market today. Now, many people have said and still do have what you could call a love-hate relationship with DNA. You might hear people say, DNA can solve all of my genealogy problems. You may also hear people say, testing is bogus. Psh, I already know all that. People are hoping that it'll prove a specific ethnicity, maybe from a family story that they've heard growing up. But then again, when they test, they go, but where is this heritage? What happened to it? Why is it not showing up? I know I'm XYZ. People also love to tell others that DNA opens doors to their heritage, their family, lost people, lines that they've never heard of before. And you really do meet cousins and other researchers out there who enjoy sharing stories with each other. But you can also hear people say, especially if you ask them to take a test for you, that it's not safe. They're afraid that people will steal or sell their data, or think of any conspiracy theory that you can think of involving DNA, and I bet you I've heard it. Now, while a lot of this may, come up, I really have to say that DNA really is just another tool. It is a tool in a genealogy's toolbox, just like a census record, another vital record, anything you can possibly think of. Is it going to answer some questions? Yes. Is it going to leave you with more questions? Probably. But DNA testing is not the end-all be-all. For genealogy, you still have to use those results with paper clues to really get a full picture and to show what your lineage and your identity is. So, DNA aspects to genealogy research. What can you discover? Well, sometimes it can help with brick walls. It can lead you to other people, other lines, other researchers. Sometimes you'll find what's called an NPE, or a non-parentage event, where you'll find out that someone in your direct line, or maybe a collateral line, doesn't have the same DNA as you. Could be for a whole host of reasons, not just somebody had an affair, but sometimes there's a previous marriage that's not documented anymore. Sometimes it could be a hidden adoption or taking in of another family member's child. There's all sorts of reasons. However, when you're going to use it with genealogy, you have to really think about, if you're trying to find a specific line or break down a specific brick wall, the things you need to find for the genealogy aspect is, how far back in time are you going? Because depending on what test you take, there are limitations. Bringing that forward, what cousin level are you matching? So if you're trying to solve a brick wall for a second great grandparent, you're looking for a third cousin. So you gotta kind of think about what type of relationships I'm looking at my matches database for. And also make sure before you do any DNA research that you've scoured every record you can think of. Why? Because when you're analyzing your results, names, places, other people's trees might hold clues to send you back to that record. So understanding and having your genealogy as much as possible, and I realize especially if you're an adoptee or you're dealing with a closer NPE, that may not be possible. And all I can say in those aspects is you really have to treat adoption and close-up NPE cases as burnt records. It's going to be the same techniques, okay? And you're going to add the DNA in as another tool. So this is just so everybody understands. I like to put a little bit of basic biology science in here. So in every cell in the human body, there are two types of DNA. There are the 46 chromosomes, 23 pairs, one set of 23 from your mother, one set of 23 from your father, and those chromosomes reside, I was going to say rely, but that's not right, reside in the nucleus of your cell. And you can see as you unwind them, the DNA comes out and you have the base pairs and your genes, and they represent them as X's in books for easy representation, but honestly, that's not quite what they look like. But we won't tell the book manufacturers that, right? And then the other type of DNA is specifically found in the mitochondria, and we'll talk about both of these. And the mitochondria just float around in the cell. They are the energy producers in the cell. So if you didn't have mitochondria, I wouldn't be able to raise my arm and wave at you and speak and run and walk and do all that kind of stuff, because it produces the energy for the cell, which then produces the energy that you can move and do all the things you want to do. All right, so the most common genealogy test out there, and I'm going to put my picture away from it so you can see this, is the autosomal DNA test. Now, this is a term used to describe the DNA that you inherit through the autosomal chromosomes. There's 22 pairs of those. The other being the X and the Y, or the sex-determining chromosomes. So autosomal DNA is good. It's average 5 to 7 generations, and for most generations, an average generation, there are people who throw this, that's about 200 years. It can confirm and give new leads to paper genealogy research, but your cousin matches will vary depending on what DNA they inherited. You can kind of think about DNA inheritance, you know, when a will is read, not one person or everybody doesn't get the exact same thing in the family. You know, some people get the silver, some people get the china, some people get the books, some people, you know, that type of thing. And depending on what you inherited from your ancestor will depend, and how it's split each generation down will depend on who you match. You may hear people say that it's good to test the oldest generations first. Why? Well, they're closer to your ancestors. They have more intact DNA than you do. If you can't test an oldest generation first, test as many cousins as you can, especially first cousins, siblings, that type of thing. Siblings only inherit on average 50% identical DNA. So even siblings have different ancestral chromosomes. So it's very important to understand what is going on, and that it's important to, I understand what I'm saying. It's important to test a variety of people so that you have more data to deal with. All right, so next slide. All right, Y DNA. So Y DNA is the DNA you have on your Y chromosome. Only men can take this test. So if you're trying to do paternal lines of descent and you're a woman, you're going to have to find a male tester. Or if you're interested, that's even for men who are trying to do research on different, like maybe collateral lines for a male line, you'll have to find a direct descendant of that line to test for you. So Y DNA tends to be used more frequently for surname studies, as well as some lineage societies now take Y DNA to help prove applicants to other already proven members of the society. It's really a wonderful tool if you are an adoptee. And a male, because that will give you your paternal line matches, which is pretty nice. It also gives you haplogroup determinations, and you can think of haplogroups as your ancient ethnicity. Okay, so we're thinking anthropological terms. Distant. A haplogroup is off of a haplotree. So think of the first Y DNA is the trunk. And every time there's a change or a mutation in the DNA, it splits into branches. And if you follow that branch to a twig, to a leaf, you would be that leaf all the way at the end of the tree. And you can follow your line all the way back to the A haplogroup for Y DNA. All right, so what are mitochondria on the other hand? Mitochondria, like we talked about in the beginning, they're the powerhouses of the cell, and there are hundreds of these bean or football kind of kidney-shaped organelles just floating around the cytoplasm of the cell. And inside of each of these, there are literally thousands, hundreds and thousands of these rings of 16,000 base pair DNA rings. And that's the DNA that we are looking at. Now, anybody can take this test and it will tell you the direct maternal line that you are from. So a woman passes her mitochondria on to all of her children. So the male children do not pass it on, but the females do. That's how you get the direct maternal line. And it also will tell you your deep ancestral haplogroups and your roots according to that. With the same principle, you know, you have the haplotree, and every time there's a change or a mutation in the mitochondria, you get a new branch, and all the way down to the leaf, which is you at the end. Okay. So a lot of people get confused or frustrated and upset because why doesn't my DNA match my genealogy? You know, what the heck's going on here? We kind of talked about this, but especially with autosomal DNA, remember, it gets halved every generation. So the further you are from the ancestor you're trying to reach or the common ancestor you're trying to find, the less chance of having large chunks of DNA in these direct to consumer tests that you can prove in an ancestry. Okay, so you're going to have less matches. You're going to have sometimes you might test like several first cousins test and maybe one of them has a match and the other two don't. Well, it's because they were lucky enough to have the same bits of DNA come down through the ancestral line, but the two of you didn't. Also, sometimes markers are inherited differently through a family. There are crossover points on the chromosomes, and sometimes they like to split and share DNA in specific ways. So if you didn't get that split, you don't have the DNA. And as a reminder, I said this before, siblings can have different genetic family trees. Everyone has two family trees. You have your paper genealogy tree that we all know from records and stories and filling out ourselves as we're living. And then you have your genetic family tree. And not everybody on your genealogy family tree will also be on your genetic family tree. And it's just because the pieces have fallen off as they've come down to you and you don't share the same segments of ancestral DNA anymore. And you also have to remember that the reference populations for ethnicity, reference populations are what they compare your DNA to determine what percentage of you are of, you know, English, French, Caribbean, African, South American, Asian, you know, etc. These, as we get more and more data and as the companies grow and evolve and learn and their scientists get better at this, that's why these ethnicities change, because they are comparing you to a different reference population. And each company has different reference populations and different ways that they analyze the data, which is why you get slight variations, sometimes bigger than others, between the different companies. So just remember that ethnicity, and if you're looking for an adoptee or an NPE, while it can give you clues, remember it also can leave information out. Okay, so who can take which test? We talked a little bit about this, but just so everyone is on the same page, autosomal DNA, anybody can take. It's best if they're over the age of 18, so adults are testing because, you're consenting, but I do know there are parents out there who get their children tested. For me, when that happens, unless you're just curious to see how your DNA was passed to your children, really the people you should be testing are you, your siblings, your parents, your cousins, because once again, they are the oldest relatives. They are closer to the ancestor. So Y DNA, obviously only men, they are the ones with the Y chromosomes. So if it's a line that you do not have the Y DNA for, you'll have to find a volunteer to help do the testing for that. Mitochondrial DNA. Anybody can take mitochondrial DNA tests, men and women, and it will give you the direct maternal line. And if you are wanting to study not your direct maternal line, once again, you'll have to find a volunteer to help you out. All right, so don't forget, DNA is a tool for genealogy research and not an alternative. They go really well hand in hand together, but don't expect DNA to solve all of your genealogical problems. You need to use it in conjunction with your paper research. There are lots of people out there on DNA forums, Facebook groups, social media accounts, lectures and webinars and seminars and books. If you have questions, find somebody and ask. It's very forgiving, friendly, and chatty community. And if you have any interest in it, you'll find somebody who will talk your ear off. Now, remember, there are new discoveries happening in DNA analysis all the time. So check your results frequently. Go back every month, every few months. I would say at least every 6 months, just to, if you're, not really working on anything in particular, just to see if there will be new results for new people who've tested. There might be new tools on the website, new information and data out there so that you can help with your research and find those ancestors you're looking for. Okay, well, thank you everybody for attending today. I hope you learned something new and got a little bit out of DNA basics. And on that note, I will see you in the next class. Bye.